Chapter 9, Part 1 of Queen Victoria. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Queen Victoria by Giles Lytton Strachey. Chapter 9, Part 1. Chapter 9, Old Age. 1. Meanwhile, in Victoria's private life, many changes and developments had taken place. With the marriages of her elder children, her family circle widened. Grandchildren appeared, and a multitude of new domestic interests sprang up. The death of King Leopold in 1865 had removed the predominant figure of the older generation, and the functions he had performed as the centre and adviser of a large group of relatives in Germany and in England devolved upon Victoria. These functions she discharged with unremitting industry, carrying on an enormous correspondence and following with absorbed interest every detail in the lives of the ever-ramifying cousinhood. And she tasted to the full both the joys and the pains of family affection. She took a particular delight in her grandchildren, to whom she showed an indulgence which their parents had not always enjoyed, though even to her grandchildren she could be, when the occasion demanded it, severe. The eldest of them, the little Prince Wilhelm of Prussia, was a remarkably headstrong child. He dared to be impertinent even to his grandmother, and once, when she told him to bow to a visitor at Osborne, he disobeyed her outright. This would not do. The order was sternly repeated, and the naughty boy, noticing that his grandmamma had suddenly turned into a most terrifying lady, submitted his will to hers and bowed very low indeed. It would have been well if all the Queen's domestic troubles could have been got over as easily. Among her more serious distresses was the conduct of the Prince of Wales. The young man was now independent and married. He had shaken the parental yoke from his shoulders. He was positively beginning to do as he liked. Victoria was much perturbed, and her worst fears seemed to be justified when, in 1870, he appeared as a witness in a society divorce case. It was clear that the heir to the throne had been mixing with people of whom she did not at all approve. What was to be done? She saw that it was not only her son that was to blame, that it was the whole system of society, and so she despatched a letter to Mr. Delane, the editor of the Times, asking him if he would frequently write articles pointing out the immense danger and evil of the wretched frivolity and levity of the views and lives of the higher classes. And 5 years later Mr. Delane did write an article upon that very subject, yet it seemed to have very little effect. Ah, if only the higher classes would learn to live as she lived, in the domestic sobriety of her sanctuary at Balmoral! For more and more did she find solace and refreshment in her Highland domain, and twice yearly, in the spring and in the autumn, with a sigh of relief, she set her face northwards, in spite of the humble protests of ministers who murmured vainly in the royal ears that to transact the affairs of state over an interval of 600 miles added considerably to the cares of government. Her ladies, too, felt occasionally a slight reluctance to set out, for, especially in the early days, the long pilgrimage was not without its drawbacks. For many years the Queen's conservatism forbade the continuation of the railway up Deeside, so that the last stages of the journey had to be accomplished in carriages. But, after all, carriages had their good points. They were easy, for instance, to get in and out of, which was an important consideration, for the royal train remained for long immune from modern conveniences, and when it drew up on some border moorland, far from any platform, the high-bred dames were obliged to descend to earth by the perilous footboard, the only pair of folding steps being reserved for Her Majesty's saloon. In the days of crinolines such moments were sometimes awkward, and it was occasionally necessary to summon Mr. Johnston, the short and sturdy manager of the Caledonian Railway, who more than once, in a high gale and drenching rain, with great difficulty "pushed up," as he himself described it, some unlucky Lady Blanche or Lady Agatha into her compartment. But Victoria cared for none of these things. She was only intent upon regaining with the utmost swiftness her enchanted castle, where every spot was charged with memories, where every memory was sacred, and where life was passed in an incessant and delightful round of absolutely trivial events. And it was not only the place that she loved; she was equally attached to the simple mountaineers, from whom, she said, she learnt many a lesson of resignation and faith. Smith and Grant and Ross and Thompson, she was devoted to them all, but beyond the rest she was devoted to John Brown. The Prince's gillie had now become the Queen's personal attendant, a body servant from whom she was never parted, who accompanied her on her drives, waited on her during the day, and slept in a neighbouring chamber at night. She liked his strength, his solidity, the sense he gave her of physical security; she even liked his rugged manners and his rough, unaccommodating speech. She allowed him to take liberties with her which would have been unthinkable from anybody else. To bully the Queen, to order her about, to reprimand her, who could dream of venturing upon such audacities? And yet, when she received such treatment from John Brown, she positively seemed to enjoy it. The eccentricity appeared to be extraordinary; but, after all, it is no uncommon thing for an autocratic dowager to allow some trusted, indispensable servant to adopt towards her an attitude of authority which is jealously forbidden to relatives or friends. The power of a dependent still remains, by a psychological sleight of hand, one's own power, even when it is exercised over oneself. When Victoria meekly obeyed the abrupt commands of her henchman to get off her pony or put on her shawl, was she not displaying, and in the highest degree, the force of her volition? People might wonder; she could not help that. This was the manner in which it pleased her to act, and there was an end of it. To have submitted her judgment to a son or a minister might have seemed wiser or more natural; but if she had done so, she instinctively felt, she would indeed have lost her independence. And yet upon somebody she longed to depend. Her days were heavy with the long process of domination. As she drove in silence over the moors, she leaned back in the carriage, oppressed and weary; but what a relief! John Brown was behind on the rumble, and his strong arm would be there for her to lean upon when she got out. He had, too, in her mind, a special connection with Albert. In their expeditions the Prince had always trusted him more than anyone. The gruff, kind, hairy Scotsman was, she felt, in some mysterious way, a legacy from the dead. She came to believe at last, or so it appeared, that the spirit of Albert was nearer when Brown was near. Often, when seeking inspiration over some complicated question of political or domestic import, she would gaze with deep concentration at her late husband's bust. But it was also noticed that sometimes, in such moments of doubt and hesitation, Her Majesty's looks would fix themselves upon John Brown. Eventually, the simple mountaineer became almost a state personage. The influence which he wielded was not to be overlooked. Lord Beaconsfield was careful, from time to time, to send courteous messages to Mr. Brown in his letters to the Queen, and the French Government took particular pains to provide for his comfort during the visits of the English sovereign to France. It was only natural that among the elder members of the royal family he should not have been popular, and that his failings, for failings he had, though Victoria would never notice his too acute appreciation of Scotch whisky, should have been the subject of acrimonious comment at Court. But he served his mistress faithfully, and to ignore him would be a sign of disrespect to her biographer. For the Queen, far from making a secret of her affectionate friendship, took